Joined by Republican Senator for Kentucky, Rand Paul. Senator Paul, welcome back to Uncensored.
Thanks for having me.
I really can't get my head around what is happening with this war now because of all the conflicting incendiary rhetoric on all sides and the kind of reality check we're seeing with our own eyes. What do you think is happening, and how does this now play out?
Well, I think it's a war of choice. So a war of choice I'd like to end as quickly as possible. I'd like to get our soldiers out of harm's way. I'd like to remove the onerous changes that have come to our economy because of this war. And so the sooner the better for me. But I think it's important to know that if you want to stop a war, it's important to know how your enemy reacts. So, for example, we have completely defeated them in every military aspect of a war. They have no control of the air, no control of the seas, and really we can do as we wish with our bombing campaign. But people have to look back in history and see, well, what will people do in that kind of situation? And I think one useful historical example to look back is at Japan. Towards the end of World War II, we'd had 400,000 soldiers die. We weren't going to quit quickly. We decided to drop 2 atomic weapons. We dropped one on Hiroshima. 3 or 4 days later on Nagasaki. Hundreds of thousands of people died. But when the Imperial Cabinet came together, most of them still wanted to continue the war. Finally, the emperor spoke up, and it was unusual for the emperor to speak. And the emperor spoke first without anyone asking a question and said, enough's enough. We're going to stop the war. But even in that utter defeat, there were people who wanted to fight on. So I think it's not really out of the question that the Iranians, even though they're utterly defeated, would fight on. So when you come to a diplomatic solution, you can continue to berate your enemy, you continue to belittle them, you can offer that you will obliterate their civilization or destroy their religion or mock their religion, but that's not a good way to actually get them to come to a diplomatic end of the war. And it's unlikely it'll be an unconditional surrender like the Japanese did after 2 atomic weapons. I think unconditional surrender is really off the table. But if there's stuff we still want, which would actually be good, like let's say they gave up their enriched uranium, that'd be a good result to a negotiation. But they're probably not going to do that just because of the military defeat. They're probably going to want something in return. So then you get to an actual negotiation. They're going to want some of their money freed up that's been frozen by the banking system. They may want relief of sanctions. And I'm actually a big believer that you should trade relief of sanctions for better behavior. Sanctions don't tend to work when you put them on a country. We have hundreds of sanctions on China and there's no effect. Hundreds of sanctions on Russia, no effect. But I do believe in removing them and trading removal for an action that you want, that you actually can get benefit from removing sanctions. So I'm for real negotiations. I'm for removing sanctions if you get verifiable changes. Removal of the enriched uranium should be worth a lot, really, to opening trade with Iran, if they would actually agree to export or have some sort of third neutral country take it. But the bottom line is I'd just like to see meaningful negotiations, and I'd like to see an end to the war as soon as possible.
The question of the enriched uranium seems pretty crucial to all this, because for Donald Trump to have any kind of off-ramp now, which looks like a victory, he would have to persuade the American people that his now declared main mission, which was to stop Iran developing a nuclear weapon, had been achieved. The only way to, I think, do that convincingly is to actually have the enriched uranium handed over or destroyed, and to be provably destroyed. But if you're the Iranians, I'm not sure there's any real incentive to do that. And they can now use the Strait of Hormuz and, of course, their highly effective attacks on their Gulf state neighbors. They can do that anytime they'd like to put more pressure back on Donald Trump, who is facing already a lot of economic and political pressure himself the longer this goes on. So I just don't understand how that happens, how the enriched uranium gets, I don't think they're going to surrender it. And how does America, or the Israelis as well, how do they get their hands on it without committing huge numbers of ground forces, which I don't think has any political appetite for that in America, given the way the polling is right now?
It becomes harder to declare victory if they retain the enriched uranium and the regime stays in power. And, last year, the Trump administration declared victory. They said we had obliterated their nuclear potential. And now they're saying, oh, no, they're still only 1 week away. So I think they're going to have to achieve something through the negotiations, either removal of the enriched uranium, because really this deal will also be made, and this deal will have critics. Even further to the right, those who really are in the perpetual war camp will say, well, you're negotiating with people who are unreliable. How are you going to verify this? How are you going to trust but verify and make sure the agreement is adhered to? So it isn't as simple as people make it out to be. You have to have inspectors on the ground. You have to bring back the international atomic inspectors. So there's a lot that has to go on. But all I can say is my hope still is for peace. My hope is for a resolution to this for many, many reasons. But it's not an easy way to do it. But I can say that any members of the administration that are using apocalyptic religious terms to describe the war are making a big mistake. I mean, a country of 90 million people who are almost entirely Islamic faith, to mock Allah or to talk about Old Testament ways we're going to smite our enemy or made up Pulp Fiction passages are probably not good ways once you get to the talking phase. And we are in the talking phase. And we will always be able to win the military phase. We won the military phase. We can continue to win. But really, short of ground troops, you're going to have to negotiate. And it means understanding your enemy, accepting exactly who they are, but also understanding that some people believe that the people now in charge are actually more radical than the people that were killed.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you've got the Supreme Leader's son is now the new Supreme Leader. Clearly, he's been wounded, so we haven't seen him. But given he lost half his family in the initial strikes, it's hard to believe he wouldn't be more hardline and radical than perhaps even his father was. And the IRGC appears to still have a very tight grip on the country because we've seen no uprisings whatsoever from the Iranian people. Partly, of course, they don't want to get bombed, but also there seems to be no belief on their part at the moment that such an uprising would lead to anything other than mass deaths as we saw back in January when they protested. If you were advising President Trump right now, I get the sense, looking at him and the conflicting positions he's taking, that he's desperate to try and get out of this, but in a way that looks like he can claim a victory. What is the best way for him to do that, do you think, quickly?
I think when you're leading up to a war, expressing how much we can do in damage is potentially a deterrent or an inducement to negotiate. Once we've already shown that we can damage and the damage has already occurred, I don't know that reminding them is doing much because, see, we've won the military phase. Now we're in the diplomatic phase. The diplomatic phase is about sitting face to face with your enemy or adversary and actually understanding that at home they will have to save face. And so if you and I are negotiating, I don't start out by saying you're ugly and your tie is terrible and your studio is bad. I would probably start out with a compliment before I tried to ask you for something. And that's the way negotiations work. It has to be on a more, I can't complain about your tie, you don't have a tie on. But it would have to be more of a conciliatory sort of conversation. And that's where we should be. And that doesn't involve words like ending the civilization, obliterating a people, bombing you back into the Stone Age. We kind of already have done that, and we've shown we have the might to do it. I don't think we have to brag about it anymore. At this point, we're in the diplomatic phase, and that really involves understanding that the leadership who's going to negotiate with you potentially has problems at home if they look too weak in the negotiations. We want something out of it. What is the main thing we want? It seems to me that the main victory of the diplomatic part of this war would be the removal of the highly enriched uranium. If you had that, a promise not to enrich, and then some sort of regime that is an international regime that is periodically in Iran to check for enrichment, I think those would be big victories. But Iran's probably not giving that up unless they get something in return, either relief of sanctions that lets them sell their oil.
So it's Iran, Paul. I'm sorry, I interrupted you there. I just want to thank you very much indeed for coming back onto Uncensored. I appreciate it.
No problem.